I just want to start by giving a very brief introduction to the workshop before we start the first panel. This workshop has been organised as part of the IMAJINE project funded under Horizon 2020. And the aim of IMAJINE has been to formulate new integrative policy mechanisms to enable European, national and regional governments to more effectively address territorial inequalities within the European Union. And we're given quite a broad brief by the call we responded to in terms of thinking about patterns of inequalities, but how European cohesion policy and the European social model has been working, and also considering issues, for example, around migration and around territorial autonomy movements. So we are an interdisciplinary consortium of 15 partners, and we've used a range of methods to try to uncover territorial inequality at different scales and to explore different dynamics of their economic development, migration, multi-level governance, and examine claims around regional autonomy and imagine more just futures. As part of that, we used a range of different research techniques to build the evidence and base for our work, and I've just highlighted some of these here. We won't talk in detail about all of this today, but we will pick up on some of this as we go through. The policy context for the work, as you will be aware, is that territorial cohesion has been embedded as a core objective of the European Union since the Treaty of Lisbon in 2007. And over a longer period, since the 1980s, EU structural funds have sought to reduce disparities in regional performance. There has been, over a number of time, evidence of economic convergence between regions up to 2008, certainly, but evidence started to suggest that there were disparities starting to increase again after the economic crisis, and that was part of the background to the call which was put out. And our analysis in IMAJINE has confirmed that there is an even pattern of convergence. That's a general trend perhaps has been restored, but within that there are some inequalities of unevenness and some persistent territorial inequalities. I think maybe in response to that, are at the same time, some of the principles underpinning the European social model and cohesion policy have been questioned. There is growing critique, perhaps, of the emphasis, at least in some of the instruments, on economic growth. There's calls for degrowth. There's calls for broader perspectives encompassing social and environmental well-being. And we've also seen challenges to centralised modes of policy making and models of redistribution across Europe from Eurosceptic and separatist movements, as well as broader issues arising from impacts of demographic ageing, migration, of globalisation and climate change. So to distill that into sort of key questions we've been exploring through IMAJINE, we wanted to understand what the dynamics and drivers of territorial inequality in Europe have been at different scales and over time, questioning whether the assumptions and principles of EU cohesion policy still hold and are interventions effective, trying to understand how territorial cohesion can be balanced with demands for territorial autonomy and what role can multi-level governments play. Questioning, actually, should we think about spatial justice or spatial injustice rather than territorial inequalities? And what happens if we do that? And indeed, how do we create a future approach that is durable into the future? So we circulated to all of you in advance of this meeting a policy brief we've constructed from our work. We have 20 key policy relevant findings and about 21 recommendations. And behind those recommendations and findings, there's a lot more detailed data analysis and discussion available in deliverables and reports and papers on the IMAJINE website. We aren't going to go through all of those findings today. We aren't just going to stand up here and present them to you. We wanted to have more of a discussion. So we've selected 4 key questions around which to construct some panels today. We very deliberately also wanted to be in conversation and therefore to include in these panels not just researchers from IMAJINE, but researchers from other projects and also contributors from the European Commission and other organisations as well. So this is our structure today. We have had a couple of late changes. as a reminder that COVID is still with us, unfortunately. So Magda Usaluse, who is going to contribute to panel 3, isn't able to join us, and Bettina Bock is going to be joining us remotely in Magda's place for that panel. And unfortunately, Saskia Duplan, again, who is going to contribute to the final panel, is not well and not able to join us today. But fortunately, everyone else is, and most of the panelists are now in the room, which is always reassuring. So, we want to have a conversation today. We want to continue that conversation beyond today. So, the format we'll take, that each panel will have a very short introductory presentation. We'll then have maybe about 40 minutes of discussion between the panelists, and then time to open that up for wider comments and questions. And if you're joining us online, please do join in that, and please do post questions or thoughts into the chat in Zoom, and Patrick and Cara are monitoring that and will ask those comments on your behalf. And then just also to continue the conversation, flag up that we are planning our final conference, IMAJINE, in Warsaw in May. That will have more of a scientific focus than today's discussion, but you're very welcome to join us there, and there's more details on that online. And also, as a final output really from IMAJINE, we are intending to set up a European network for spatial justice with researchers, practitioners, and to exist, to share practice, continue discussion, and share research, perhaps primarily through webinars and online events. And again, we'll be sending out a follow-up email to people who registered today about that. There's also a link here to sign up for more information and express interest in that. So I'm now going to finish that, and I think it's time to move on to the first panel. Our first panel this morning is discussing the question of, do we have the correct data to tackle regional inequalities? And I'm going to hand over to Anna Pinera, who's going to give an initial presentation and then chair the panel. And we're also going to be joined by Esteban Fernandez, by Paolo Pestavini, and by Nicholas Rossignol, who will come and join us for that panel when we start.
Thank you very much to everybody, and let's start with the first panel. Let's start with the first panel, trying to show our key findings in the IMAJINE project regarding this specific topic about the data. I will try not to jump into topics of discussion that should be discussed at the end of the paper. I will try just to show facts, things, findings, but I'll try to leave the proper questions for the end. This is just going to be descriptive of findings and giving some keys, some clues of the questions that should be discussed later on. I'm from the University of Oviedo. I'm one of the partners of the IMAJINE project, and another colleague from University, Chieti Pescara, will be part of this panel, as well as Esteban Fernandez from the University of Oviedo, and as well as, thank you, Nicolas, some member of the ex-Lisbon project. I wanted to start this presentation just with a typical sentence saying territorial inequalities are a key concern across Europe. But when we realize, I'll say it. I thought I had something else. When we realize and we read about territorial inequalities, we realize that indeed, they are always talking about regional inequalities. That is something that we should question ourselves. Territorial inequalities, is it the same as regional inequalities? All the cohesion funds, the European regional policy, all the different funds that we have received, we have always received them at NATS 3 level. So when Europe talks about territorial inequalities, it talks about regional inequalities. And then I keep on going with this sentence. The European Union tries to address the territorial inequalities regarding 3 different aspects: economic well-being, then it touches the aspect of social cohesiveness, and then at the end says something about the quality of life. Well, we know that indeed, when we get all the funds, the mainly figure is always GDP per capita. It's the one that the funds are given away, taking into account always GDP per capita. That social part, that quality of life part, is kind of neglected. It's kind of, well, it's always in paper, but it's never in practice. Key finding, first one. When we measure territorial inequalities, we can measure it in so many ways that depending on the way we measure it, we will get different results and even contradictory results. Let's go for examples. Here you have the map of average household income at NUTS 3 level for the European Union. Well, as expected, we can recognize like the rich regions, in some different countries, like the poor regions or regions being left behind at NUTS 3 level. Then notice please that these maps are being constructed because its average income is not GDP using the EU silk, and Germany is on a full area. This is just some hint for the debate. Germany, it's a full area. It's not even divided in regions. What's the story? Germany doesn't have regions? No, it doesn't provide the data for the regions. So here we have one problem already that I just want to point out like that in that map. Fine, so we move on from GDP per capita. So yeah, there's information about average income, household income. When we start touching more social aspects beside the GDP, yeah, we can find information from this database, for example, and we have a composite index, the AROPE, the population at risk of poverty, also for these regions provided by this dataset. Although in some countries, average income shows a different picture than poverty rates, like for example in Poland or in the UK, more or less, we believe that average income, poverty, well, it's just the opposite side of the coin. We move more into social aspects because we want to move only exclusively from the economic aspects to treat those 3 different points of territorial inequalities. So when we talk about well-being, come on, the first information that we could show was unemployment rates, and we have unemployment rates at NUTS 3 level, at regional level. Well, the picture here is really kind of blind. It doesn't say a lot apart from south of Italy, the south of Spain, Greece. Well, the typical story, Romania, the typical story that we know about it. It might be the scale, yeah. If we study this country by country, we can find differences. But honestly, I have a look at that. There's not much diversity when we talk about social aspects. But what is the story? The story is that NUTS 3, NUTS 2 are very, very broad areas. And there are so many internal disparities that not only we should question ourselves about what indicators we use if we want to touch economic aspects, social aspects, well-being aspects, but also what is the scale, the spatial scale that we should be using. Those regions are really, really vast, and there are so much heterogeneity within the regions that indeed, it would be desirable to have information like that. This is information on household income at local level, LAU 2 level, and suddenly the picture is different. This is what we did in IMAJINE. These are estimations, and we only managed to do them for those countries where we could perform the technique, right? But suddenly we get a richer analysis because we can detect cities where average income is expected to be higher, obviously, but also we can detect areas around cities where there's much lower levels of average income, poorer areas around the cities. And we can also detect that in those rural areas when we were working with regions, there are also rich pockets. So the picture is more complex, and the complexity increases even when you estimate the population at risk of poverty. Poverty is very concentrated in some areas around cities. And that is something that is completely vanished when you use regional data. You don't see that. You don't see those pockets of poverty, right? So now we have a different picture, the only one that we could build with availability of data. And we are getting more into social aspects. We are going deeper spatially, and also for unemployment, which is another important variable. Now, before we had like a blind kind of canvas, like not saying much. Now we can see the disparities, like the unemployment, huge unemployment rates that are experienced or are present in different areas of different countries, including Ireland, the Celtic Tiger, the one that was doing so well with average income, right? Including some areas of Poland, Greece, Italy, also in the north of Italy, we have high unemployment rates. It's a more complex picture, as well as in areas around Madrid that were supposedly healthy, no, higher unemployment rates. If we observe, of course, we could zoom up these maps. I wanted to show you the overall Europe that we have in the IMAJINE project. But of course, if you zoom up all this information and you recognize different cities and areas around cities, you can have richer analysis of what's going on in different areas within regions. Education has been neglected also, like as a quality of life, as a social indicator in this kind of showing what's going on in the regions. And levels of education are completely linked and interlinked with well-being, but also with economic growth, human resources. And here, once again, we have a different scenario, different view if we consider local data than if we were using regional data. It's very funny to see how the higher educational levels are just in cities. You can see every single kind of darker spot, for example, in France, where all the main cities are. Despite of these disparities that I'm showing to you, internal disparities, if we introduce the variable time, maybe the question is not what's happening inside the regions, but what's happening across time, over time. But what's happening over time is two things that I'm going to show to you now. We are narrowing the disparities at regional level till 2008. Then they have increased since that economic crisis. We have to stop because of the data in 2014. That is one thing that I'm going to show to you. So probably the cohesion funds have done something about disparities, territorial disparities at regional level. But interestingly, in the IMAJINE project, what we have underlined is the importance of clusters of growth, the importance of spatial dependence, the importance of location of the region within Europe and within your country. First graph. This first graph shows a typical study about convergence. I think this one is beta convergence for all the European countries. And you can see that in 2008, there was convergence at regional level. And then after 2008, if we could zoom up a little bit the map, there was like a change of the tendency because of the economic crisis from 2008. I'm just going to point out that this is coming from an article from this year, and it stops in 2014. And it's not because researchers are lazy, it's because that's it. We have a 5 years delay in regional data. Not to talk about local data, no, regional data. That is the most recent figure when these estimations were performed. That was probably a year ago. Maybe now we will have 1 year more. So if we want to kind of really react to what's going on at present times, we should be questioning ourselves why that 5-year delay in regional data. And as one of the main drivers of economic growth in terms of GDP, so convergence of European regions, is productivity, production per worker. Here you have the graph of the growth of productivity at regional level. And what you can see here is that the regions, peripheral regions, and the ones that are lagging have the highest productivity growth rates. Therefore, we're converging. But why am I showing this graph to you? Well, I'm showing it to you because we can, first of all, because it's a really nice graph that shows convergence, if you know how to interpret it. But the main point is the spatial dependence. There are different areas and all clustered together that are growing, and we have to ask ourselves why my growth depends of the growth on whatever terms of the neighbor. We tend to establish policies devoted to this region, but not taking into consideration what's going on in the region behind that one. We have to talk about spillovers. We have to talk about synergies between regions. It is important, cooperation between regions. But even if you don't cooperate, even if you are from different political signs, what happens in the region beside you is affecting what's happening in yours. And this study that belongs to the IMAJINE has shown the convergence, typical convergence models, but taking into account this spatial dependence, which is very, very important and has been forgotten until recently. We're talking about economic variables. We're talking mainly about economic variables at regional level. There's a delay on the data. Then we get into social data and we see that it has not been used, it's not available. But what about well-being? What about that part of cohesion policy that is forgotten? Well-being, how to measure well-being? Well, in the last years, we all have been affected by the COVID, which has affected strongly our well-being. And there are recent studies using recent data on how the regions with higher or lower average income were more or less affected by the COVID pandemic. That was the question. Are there also disparities in how a pandemic like the COVID can affect regions, poor regions versus richer regions? Is there also territorial, regional inequalities in health? There are. What is the problem? Like here, when we try to relate average income with COVID cases at regional level, sorry, but it's not very clear, the relationship. It's weak. There's not a clear tendency. At the most, regional level, at the most, I could say, well, the richer regions were the ones more affected by the COVID. Things change if we get a bit deeper into detail. This is only for the UK data at local administrative units level. So then when you go deeper and when you have access, fortunately enough, at local level about COVID cases, and you relate them to in this case, the index of deprivation, some kind of index for poverty, when 1 is the maximum value, you see indeed that there are territorial, local disparities, strong ones, when the cases of the COVID cases have affected stronger the poorer localities. In this case, in the UK, there are also studies for Dublin and for Wales that confirm this same hypothesis, but only working with local data. Regional data, as you could see, we could see no territorial disparities regarding health, regarding COVID. So, key finding number 5. We need comparisons between nations. We need comparisons, data that is comparable at local scale. We need it to go deeper at regional scale, to go deeper into different topics, but the data doesn't exist. So that brings me to the title of the panel. Do we have the correct data to tackle territorial or regional inequalities? 4 questions we're going to try to discuss, not necessarily in this order, depending on how you feel. I would welcome maybe the panelists to sit around here. The first question is, at what scale should we be measuring territorial inequalities? So far, it looks like we are measuring them at NUTS2 region. Should we go deeper? What for? Second question, well, in case of extending the number of variables to analyze territorial inequalities for policy making, which indicators should be collected? What indicators ideally we would need? Third point, fine, let's imagine that we have that data. What could we do with it? Composite indicators maybe to help policy design, policy evaluation, funds assignment? And fourth, how that improved quality data could help the design of policies to fight, to erase, to diminish territorial inequalities in Europe. So those are the 4 questions for the panel. And please, panelists, I would welcome you here.
So I'm going to use my favorite answer to almost everything, which is it depends. I mean, it depends on what you are actually interested in. So I'm an economist myself. And if I think in terms of, for example, economic performance, which was one of the issues that you were mentioning here, which is related to the European economic policy, I would say that NUTS2, it's kind of okay. In the sense that most of the, NUTS2 scale, I mean, in terms that most of the factors that you have behind economic growth can be explained at this scale. So it depends on, for example, economic specialization, the industry mix, which at that scale, it's pretty okay. But if you are more concerned with other aspects of inequalities, more related to quality of life, well-being, I think we are falling short on this. Of course, if possible, we would need more detailed data with a richer granularity. This is part of our job actually in the in the project, and I don't know how Paulo feels about this. So I want to go. I don't want to go deeper now into this, but most probably you have something to say.
Yeah, but I would like to start my point in the same way as you, because I agree. It depends. This is the correct sentence that I can add, because obviously, if you look at territorial inequalities, if you want to understand the correct composition of the territorial inequalities, you look at not NUTS2 level, but you go to very local level, because if you consider NUTS2 level, you can mask some different aspects that are different in the same regions. Mm-hmm. So in some regions, if you consider this region at NUTS2 level, have inside different pattern of territorial inequalities. So we know that NUTS2 level, NUTS2 regions are considered for management of structural funds, but it depends on the situation, because if we want to address correctly the phenomenon of territorial inequalities, we need to look inside the region. So this is my opinion, obviously, but so we need to have 2 different data sets in some sense. We need to have NUTS2 regions and data on NUTS2 region to have a raw picture of the reality. But if we want to have more information, we need to have local data. The problem is the local data should be estimated. So you know that, and so different estimation methods can lead to different results in terms of pattern of territorial inequality. So if we look at NUTS2 region, we analyze, we give more attention to between region disparities, but we give less attention to within region disparity. And it depends on the focus of the analysis. This is my opinion, but we need to have two different analysis and to following two different aims of the situation. So I think that this is my my point. The problem is that different estimation methods can lead to different pattern of territorial inequality because there are no official data on very local level for territorial inequalities or for territorial indicators.
That's very important what Paolo just pointed out, because in the IMAJINE project, we have proved that the disparities between regions in Europe are more due to internal disparities within them than between them. So that is one of the results as well that I would like to remark. The average of the region is masking lots of things that are going on inside. We have the view of two academics here. Maybe you have a different opinion because they kind of agree.
No, actually, I agree also, but from a different perspective. So, and the question, before coming back to the question of scale, which is probably, no, I will go back later. It's just like a couple of maps I came, which is in case just to illustrate some of the things I wanted to say. But yes, the question of scale is probably the most complicated and most complex, and also the most important and interesting, as you said, because the same territories, I mean, display totally different stories depending on how you look at them. So I would like to start with that, because we're talking about territorial inequalities. We'll be talking about also social justice or spatial justice, later today. And I think this is less a technical question than a political question at the end of the day. So the aim is more important than the means most of the time. And when one knows what is to be addressed, then we can arrange the data accordingly. I mean, everything is politics. We have to keep that in mind. I think this is also my experience. I'm an academic. I used to work 20 years also on the other side of the ocean for governments at different territorial level, national, regional, or local, metropolitan, and so on. I was in charge of economic and territorial policies, especially dealing with these topics. And I can tell you that the way you look at things, and you showed that already with the different maps, and when introducing the different key findings of the IMAJINE project, it's extremely important. So, however, at this point, we are like European research-led program. We are funding research activities and research project, and our tagline is to inspire policymaking with territorial evidence. I'm not saying, I don't mean that we should twist the data, or the data are not objective. Yes, they are, but really the question from the answer to the question, are the data correct, depends mainly on the question that you're asking. What are you looking for, and what public policies aim at achieving? So this is the starting point, I think. And introducing the concept of justice and challenging also the way you did in the project, the centrality of economic growth is a very good start. Because then if you do that, then you allow ourselves to think how to arrange data differently. And also to look at the problems from a different perspective. And this is, I think, the most inspiring and interesting things that I see immediately when I start screening the different outcomes of the IMAJINE project. And then going back to the question of the scale, regional and not regional. So we are facing, of course, as a pan-European program, trying to do like pan-European comparisons. We are facing these challenges every day. I will maybe let aside for a while the EU dimension, because of course it's true that for the purpose of the allocation of EU funds, it's important to be able to agree together on some indicators, because the way we would like, and the commissions and the EU institutions, more generally speaking, would like to address those territorial levels. It could be like, I don't know, cross-border areas or functional areas, and not only administrative areas. Then, of course, how to decide how to allocate the funds will rely a lot on the way you look at these places. But before that, once addressed the national distribution of public resources, who is in charge of addressing territorial inequalities in the countries? Everyone. Every single territorial level is entitled to that. So if we ask ourselves the question of the scale, we need to adjust our answers to their needs. and their needs are very different. Same territories, different stories, as you were saying. So it depends on the zoom that needs to be applied.
You just pointed out something very interesting that links us to the third question, which is that when we are giving money away, the indicators that Europe uses to give money have to be simple, have to be, it cannot be very, very complex, because otherwise it would not be very clear who is getting what for because of what. So what do you think about the use of composite indicators in order to provide the next wave of European funds? What that composite indicator should include in order to address spatial justice, not anymore territorial inequalities, but spatial justice? What any ideas of the variables that could be included?
You want me to start, or
I don't know.
I'm not a big fan of composite indicators, because basically we have the same problems as with, let's say, more straightforward, simpler indicators. In terms of scale, for example, while we are adding additional complexities. So first of all, and you were mentioning something, I think the most important one, which is the complexity. While other, let's say, more direct indicators are relatively easy to recover from official statistics, registers, etc. Perhaps we are just being a bit, how should I call it, falling short in the definition of inequalities. But the problem with the composite indicators is that you need to put some criteria in order to put all this information together. And depending on this, your results, your outcomes are going to, or could be, potentially very different. So, for example, you have this composite human growth or development index, right? So it's just 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But if you change these weights slightly, well, not slightly, significantly, your numbers are going to be different as well. So if you put more dimensions there, your problem, let's say, explodes. I know that there are, well, kind of more scientific, if you want to call it this way, statistical techniques to assign weights on a more scientific way, but this adds a lot of complexity. So if you ask me what are the right variables to consider, what is the right way of putting this into a single number, I don't have an answer.
Yes,
you have an answer.
I think no. I think I fully support what you say. There is one recommendation. I think it's the first recommendation in the policy brief, which is calling for composite indicators at the EU level. I think it would be a huge step forward already, because you include dimension, and you call for going beyond economic growth and etc., which is very interesting. But I would like to express the same sort of concern about the in operational terms at least. And we experience at ESPON the development of various composite indicators to depict territorial trends, etc. And we had very good experiences and very bad. And I wanted to show you some of them very bad. Oh, less useful. Starting with two dimensions, two things that you already said. That firstly, poverty and social inequality, territorial inequalities, they are very localized patterns. So taking them at the broad scale will give us usually not the right image of the situation, the picture of the situation. The second dimension, again, is who are these composite indicators addressed to? Who is going to use them? What for? So, for instance, I can show a couple of maps just to, because you mentioned quality of life. Quality of life, just make it move. I can just do it like that, up, and I will.
Perhaps you prefer to sit here.
Yeah.
I can sit over there. It's more efficient for
this. So you have here, for instance, we've been working on shrinking rural areas, of course, using as a start demographic indicators, but then trying to go further and beyond that, and introducing also the concept and the notion of income in this region, and also economic structure of the different regions, etc. So with the same figures, describing and depicting demographic trends, we could identify through this more complex shrinkage composite indicators different drivers. And these different drivers are extremely important for the policymakers, because beyond the same figures, the same numbers, then you can inform policymaking in a different way and much more focused and tailored way for that. So this is one case when this exercise of composite indicators make really sense, and we confronted that with policymakers in the different regions, and they understood what it means and how they could also address the situation within their own competencies at their scale. There are two other examples. One is about quality of life that we recently also developed, another sort of index, which is extremely interesting and scientifically, very seriously grounded. But at the end of the day, when we confronted and gave the results to the different countries, we faced complicated situation when countries were telling us that, well, look, this is absolutely not the way. We are looking and seeing well-being and quality of life when using our own data and our own data available at national and regional and local level. So, but because the way we are depicting and considering quality of life indicators in our country is what the policymakers are using to implement ANZUS and public policies, then they were not able to make any sort of use of the picture we were bringing to them at this stage. So another one, which is an extremely interesting concept in the discussion, I think today, the concept of inner peripheries that was developed by and explored within ESPLAN in 2018 with the idea of trying to understand the peripherality, so but everywhere, not only urban and remote areas, etc., but including enclaves of low economic potential, the issue of access to services of general interest, and also the way places where are more or less connected to each other. The theoretical analysis was extremely interesting. And the results are as well. You've got the picture with the drivers on the map, but again, confronted to the reality of the way regional authorities, countries were considering their place, these dimensions. I mean, we faced the world because this was absolutely not the way. Some countries were considering and analyzing their own peripheralization or peripheralized places, and they couldn't include this piece of work in their own policy making exercises. And this is, I think, extremely important to make sure that when we go and develop composite indicators, we know precisely for whom we're doing that.
Okay. So this is a call for homogenization of the data and the use of the data at different levels, which is related to the different levels of governance. That is also part of the IMAJINE project.
Can I try to answer this because yes, I'm a statistician, so my point of view is influenced by this a priori. And in the last period, I worked a lot about on composite indicators. So, and I think that territorial inequalities is a multidimensional. So the only possibility to highlight the reality is to develop a composite indicator. This is my opinion. But the problem is the composite indicator. We need a method in order to develop a composite indicator, and different methods can be defined and can lead to different results. I know that at the end of the situation, you don't have the value of indicator as at the beginning of the procedure, but the value, in my opinion, is not important at the end, but it is important the ranking of, for example, the ranking of different regions concerning this composite indicator. I think that this is a great challenge for analysts, the developing of composite indicator, because I think that if you want to address territorial inequalities, you need to consider different aspects, as you said in your slides, and these different aspects, in some sense, we need to combine them in such way. I don't know, because, for example, in the project, we define, we use a spatial method, spatial that means that we use contextual information to develop a composite indicator only for France, Spain, and Italy, but at very local level. This is the novelty of our approach, because at the moment, in many cases, in literature, to the best of my knowledge, composite indicators are developed at NUTS2 or NUTS3 level. In IMAJINE project, we develop a composite indicator using spatial information, so in a different way, a completely different way, using data set providing from workbench 2 at very local level. So we have a complete, so in some sense, only for Spain, France, and Italy. So we define this composite indicator for these three countries. But the really results is that is the same of my answer of the previous question that Hannah raised, because if you look, because we prove, we try to define this methodology to NUTS3 level, and we apply the same methodology to very local level, and the results are different, because also in this case the situation is completely masked at the NUTS3 level. I think that we need different, also in this case, different composite indicator in order to analyze different situation. I mean that in order to provide European Union structural funds, I think that it is very difficult to go to very local level. But if you want to have to define ad hoc policy, for example, I'm looking to, for example, Rome, that is my city. Rome is a very complicated situation, because if you look at Rome at the national level, you must completely different periphery. And we have many different situations inside Rome. So the main challenge for the future, in my opinion, is twofold. Because the first is to define different methods for composite indicator that can be compared, because it is very important for a statistician compare different methods and the robustness of these methods. But the second one is apply this composite indicator to very local level. This is my opinion, because otherwise we talk about a situation very general, and it is the great benefit from IMAJINE project is okay. We have different situations. We include the spatial information in all our analysis. For example, for beta convergence, that is very standard and classical analysis, but we analyze that concept using an approach based on spatial dependence, for example, as Hannah mentioned in her presentation. But if we don't look inside a region, we have some problem. This is before the beginning of IMAJINE project. I worked only with NUTS3 and NUTS2 level. After the IMAJINE project, I work with NUTS2 and NUTS3 level, because NUTS3 and NUTS2 are official data. So we need to use them, but we need to define some methods in order to disaggregate, and this is another answer to another concept, but because we need also to analyze a local situation in order to provide ad hoc policies, because this is the main objectives of this project. Because if you consider only the statistical methods, this is my field, but it is not enough.
Okay, it's very, very clear that having local data is very important for us, academia. I would love most of the European countries to have a data set like the ones provided in Denmark, individual level, geo-reference people, Denmark, I think the Netherlands has it as well, Sweden. It would be fantastic. You have information at individual level, where they live, where they work, so you have lots of information about people. Therefore, you have spatial information because you have also information where they live. But the question is, let's imagine that we have all that information at European level, which, you know, it's politically challenging because, well, you could see Germany. Germany didn't provide information at regional level because of privacy issues. So let's imagine we have like proper information at local level. Europe makes a big effort to collect local data, or we have a data set at individual level, like in those countries that I just mentioned. How could policy making could improve if having that information? Academically speaking, that would be wonderful. That would be an ideal world, studying, making studies about mobility, about anything you can imagine, about power, poverty, periphery, central, everything. Academically speaking, wonderful world. But for policy making, how would this data help our policy design, evaluation, assignment of funds? So maybe that is more a question for you, Nicholas.
I think I was maybe a different point of view on the fact that this data exists, actually. A politician is accountable to its constituents. So is looking always for the data that are available, I mean, within the boundaries of this, the place where he is elected. So he will always prefer to look at the data available there, even if it makes more sense to consider the trends or the territorial patterns at a broader scale, etc. And the national statistical institutes are doing their job. They are providing this data. It's just like this data, they are not always comparable. They are not always exactly the same. And because also the value of the data are different from a country to another.
Monetary value, even.
Cultural also and political perspective of this. So, of course, at EU level and Eurostat and all the NSI, they cannot do constantly the job, and it takes, you show that this is the most important, that we need like 5-6 years before being able to start understanding what happened in the past at very local level. We think that there is a possibility, there is a way for research programs to go into countries and to collect this data, but going beyond the statistical data, we need to go to administrative data. There are so many available, including in Germany, to depict that. I mean, let's go to the social security systems, let's go to the mobile phone operators, etc., etc. There are so many sources that are available everywhere in Europe, but there is a huge piece of work to be done to collect and gather this data and to be able to release them in a much shorter period of time. That's what we try to do. And that's what we're trying to do at ESPAN at the moment. And that's what we would like to do also in the future. We will have like a new thematic strands on called People and Places, which try to address precisely these questions. And one of our objectives is precisely that. We launched recently a study about the social impacts of COVID across Europe. So I'm okay. At the moment, we just managed to reach the NUTS3 level and not beyond. But this is the first step. I don't know if I think I have a map like that. Let me check. Yes, this is so, because we said like the latest data were available for 2014. This is at NUTS3 level unemployment 2019, 2020. Because they went to every 31 countries, including EFTA countries, to collect and gather this data. And so this is the picture so far, and then you can also see that about like the patterns and the consequences on the employment of the COVID situation was different, not that serious everywhere. So this is still possible, and I think this is for academics and researchers like we are, you are. It's something really important and interesting in the next years.
Esteban, do you have something
Yeah, well,
to say?
I can only agree with Nicolas in the sense that this is the way. I mean, using this administrative data for sure. Years ago, we only had the option of base everything on surveys, but these are expensive. It takes time to collect, to analyze, and you have this lag on the data. And yeah, we have the data there, and we should, well, find creative ways of making this data useful while keeping the privacy. You know that there are ways of doing that. And well, I'm connecting more with your specific question. I think the key answer is double. I mean, it's useful for policy design in terms of planning. Just to have good data is key thing for that. And in terms of policy evaluation, so something as Nicolas is presenting here, we have a shock. In this example is a completely exogenous shock, but we can evaluate the impact of some given policy by just having the good data.
Yeah.
That's it?
Yes,
You want to add something, Paolo?
But I think that in the future we have many challenges because, for example, the development of big data, for example, it's very important because big data at the mix between big data and the local level or also national level, we can have many information about the phenomenon. So I think that in the future, in order to improve the quality of data and so in order to have to define more appropriate policies, we need to analyze different sources of data, not only the official data in the sense of the administrative data and but also other source of information that we combine. From a statistical point of view, this is the problem because the combination is very complicated. And this is the field of Esteban. For example, in order to disaggregate from NAS3 to very local level, we can define very different estimation methods. So it is very complicated, but I think that it is a challenge because for the future, we need to combine different aspects. And only in this way we can improve the quality of data. Because for a statistician, the quality means that the data is appropriate for the objective of the analysis. In this policy seminar, the term is policy. So we need to have appropriate data for defining policy and ad hoc policy for territories. So I think that we need different sources of information, and we need to combine them, and we need to
homogenize them.
Yes, because for example, my idea. Look at I don't know. Because this is a European Union. So, for example, territories that are on the border of a country, for example, Italy and France. And we need that the data are homogeneous between, for example, Nice and Sanremo, that is in Italy, and are very close to each other. So, and it is because administrative data are homogeneous, but other sources of data we need to combine them. So we need that these data are homogeneous. So in order to analyze border situation, because it is very important if you look at Lombardy in Italy. I'm sorry for Italian example, but Lombardy is very similar to the north of Europe, and it is not very similar to the south of Italy. So it is similar to France, in some economic composition, but not similar to south of Italy. So we need to consider that the boundary of a country is not.
It is very relevant because borders are disappearing.
Yes, in some
So if
cases.
borders are disappearing, we have to consider the space as a flow, not like borders in the middle. Anyway, I think I'm going to ask you now, like if you would like to be asked some question that I haven't asked, then I'll give the word to the audience. Maybe there's some question from the audience, and then we'll go online. Maybe there are some questions online. So the first part is, would you like to have been asked the question that I haven't asked, that you would like to to tell us about something that you have in your mind back there that you want to talk about?
Maybe quickly two things, but firstly, I want to just follow up to what's just said, because it opened two very interesting discussions. One about the use of unconventional data, which is extremely important for statisticians. I know it's horrible thing because of the reliability, the coverage, and everything, but for policymakers, it's incredible. So many of us are experimenting this, and we know how complicated it is. But there is one dimension, this is the second part, which we need to look at the topics also. What are we talking about? So it's maybe not useful for everything, but there are some very specific topics that can be addressed and captured by that, and especially one dimension that is not mentioned not that much in the IMAJINE project I found, which is the housing market dynamics, and how people can access affordable housing in Europe. And this is becoming such an important question also in regards with territorial inequalities, spatial justice, etc. And for this, unconventional data can be extremely useful, because we know that that's market. I mean, these markets are extremely localized. You can talk about anything.
It's very complicated
at the start,
to
talk about Roma, I mean, big city, or Brussels. You cannot consider it as a single market.
No.
You need to look very precisely. So there, big data sources and conventional data, scrapping, etc., are very useful sort of data. And the second dimension, you mentioned it, the flows. The question of flows. The question of flows is also very important, because we are looking at the situation and the disparities like a static way. But in fact, there are many things happening across regions. And this is the question I wanted to be asked, maybe, yes, I think that there is a huge invisible there are huge invisible flows of wealth circulating across regions that are not captured at all by the usual indicators we are dealing with. And this needs to be much further analyzed, I think, by research. You're calling it the European social model, the welfare state, whatever. I mean, it's applied, of course, maybe more northern countries and western countries. Then it's more a question of time than a question of places, because it's happening also there. Beyond economic growth, there is a growing divergence between the concentration of growth and wealth and the income and the territorial development of the places. And this needs to be much further, I think, considered in order to better address this.
Maybe I have now an address question to Esteban, because he knows something about wealth that he could share with us. Wealth is really important.
Yeah, I mean, again, as an economist, we know that the main driving force of inequality is not in terms of income, but it's in terms of wealth and in terms of assets. And again, and with the COVID thing, we had a very good example of that. So suddenly, many households just found that they had no income at all. So the income that they were receiving just 2 months before, it was completely non-informative about their capacity. Well, not completely, but provides just imperfect information about their capacity to resist to this negative shock. And we need to put this, so just taking your question or rephrasing some of your questions is not only the scale, it's are we paying attention to the right variables? So it's connected to Nicolas' remark, because again, we have the data. So the European Central Bank is paying attention to that. And they are conducting regular surveys on this. The main problem is that they don't provide us with regional detail, but the data is there. So it is connected with the housing market. It is connected with the money that these households have in the bank, or if they are investing in something, which are their capacity to resist if suddenly there is a negative downturn in the economy, things like that. And another kind of related questions, differences in the cost of living, which again is related to that. Because we have good information about different regional patterns with the CPI indicators. But if you take a given period of time and you want to compare, for example, your figures on income, so your purchasing power indicators are just provided at the national level. And this is tricky because with, I don't know, 30,000 euros in Madrid, you are doing not that well, but in other regions in the south of Spain or south of Italy, you're pretty okay. Yes. And this type of things should be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. Paolo, do you want to add something short?
Because I completely agree with Nicholas, because I think that house market data are very important. And I'm starting a study about this because I think that it is an important proxy in order to measure inequalities and in a big city, for example. Mm-hmm. And the second remarks that I would like to point out is that we need to remember that inequality, territorial inequalities, is a multidimensional phenomenon. And the third one is pay attention that we need to analyze not only the static situation, but also the trend of the phenomenon, because it is important not only to give a picture of the moment, but we need also to analyze how the phenomenon goes across the years, because it is very important for one of the main objectives of the European Commission is the reduction of disparities, and the terms reduction of disparities is not static, because we can have a picture of the moment, but we need to analyze the phenomena across the years. So I think that if we combine these different aspects, big data, longitudinal data, and the longitudinal analysis, and the multidimensional phenomenon, we can address correctly territorial inequalities.
Well, just to finish this debate, just a reminder that the left behind regions is one of the other topics of the IMAJINE project, and linking them to nationalist independent movements, which is a really hot topic at the moment, starting with Britain and then followed by many other regions and countries in Europe. So it's another topic covered by the IMAJINE project, and very, very interesting. So now some questions from the audience, maybe. Yes,
very short two comments. One, I would definitely want to follow your suggestion that dynamics is crucial. If you are talking about the policy-oriented indicators, this is so important to recognize that different tendencies could be we could observe on the regional level, NUTS2 level, and different on the local level. Yeah, and this is crucial for the tools of cohesion policy and so on. Since we have and that is what we recognize also in this project, that we have required somehow in many places the convergences on the regional level. And what we know also from our Polish studies experience, that there is a convergence between the main cities, between the regional centers, but there's also the price for that. And the price is the bigger polarization on the local level. And so this is not just that we recognize that the real inequalities are on the local level. in my opinion, they are deeper and deeper, the inequalities over there. Even on the European level, we could observe the convergence. So this is one point. And another one is when we propose some composite indicators. This is, of course, very good from the academic point of view. But again, if we are talking about the policy making, and even if we have just GDP as a main indicator for the cohesion policy, even on that level already we have a kind of the innovative policies and changing of the borders. Then that's so let's say cohesion policy gerrymandering, something like that. And the division of the regions, just looking for the option to receive more European money. So maybe it is a threat. It is the basic and very simple indicators are, of course, weak, and we know about this. But on the other hand, there is also the threat of to get something more complex. I don't know. What do you think about this?
Okay. Do you want anybody to answer? Was it just a comment, not a
It's not a
question,
comment,
really?
Yes, it's a comment.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
I have one. Nicholas was talking about the experience he had in developing the composite indicators, and he really gave us this insight that sometimes it could be okay, sometimes it's a really not very useful experience. And this is really important to make people understand. Sometimes we talk about composite indicators a lot, but it's something in the process. I mean, sometimes it's a very long process. And one thing I was also following up previous comments is that is it always, in your opinion, worthwhile to try in this process of composite indicators, particularly the process of developing a composite indicators may be particularly good for improving the multi-level governance, different policies get engaged together to try the definition, try to understand what the best data, maybe the final result may be pretty bad, but the engagement between different would be okay, always workful.
I think you're absolutely right. This is the point. I mean, going for composite indicators is valuable because of the value you give to the to the things that you put inside. But who is able to put to give a value to things? So this is the role of academics, or this is the role of policymakers. I think composite indicators become interesting when they are processed the way you say, when people engage, researchers, policymakers together and agree to give value to things. For instance, I was talking about the quality of life index. I mean, you have like wonderful academic global research on that. But when it came to the ground, I had two examples, one in Slovenia, one in the Netherlands, where the most important things was to look at the available data on the ground and to agree on how to weight the composition of the panel within. This was a discussion between, and then you can arrange things the way you want. You can include citizens, you can remain at the level of policymakers across administrative boundaries, you can include researchers or not, and then, but it depends on every single territorial context, and then gives the value to your academia. So I fully agree.
Citizens were engaged in the composition of the,
Absolutely.
citizens like the bottom up, like
Yes, can be. There are many experiences like that. Absolutely.
Okay, that's nice.
Can I add something? Just for clarification, because before I was saying that I was not a big fan of composite indicators, but this doesn't mean, I'm not saying that everything is one-dimensional. No. You can have all your data set with all your set of variables, but you don't need to put this into a single number. Yeah. Just because implicitly you are saying that you can, well, I can do a bit worse in terms of health, but just giving an improvement in terms of education, I'm okay. And I think this is not the story here. So you can provide the policymakers with all these data sets, with all these dimensions that we should consider, and then, okay, you're the guys in charge. So do whatever you want to do. But
maybe citizens more than politicians.
Well, as representatives of
maybe
citizens.
that should be the case.
Okay.
Any more questions, comments from the audience? Do we have any question online?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I'll ask a question first. I think a couple of questions can comment. So I think picking up just on as previous last point, Barry, question is imagine we were asked to think about spatial justice as well as territorial inequalities. I think one of the points when we're talking about the choice of variables is that when it becomes spatial justice, because it is this political choice about which variables we use and the impacts of that. And that, thinking about that from a spatial justice point of view, allows saying, are regions being disadvantaged by those decisions which are made about what gets counted to talk about inequality and distributed resources? And I think that it interestingly shifts the focus onto understanding that process as being part of what is potentially disadvantaging regions, and issue of justice about whether that process is fair. And I like the idea of citizens, because actually part of this becomes there's always going to be someone advantage and disadvantage. So let's start to open this out of discussion. We need transparency in that data. We need transparency in the choice of what the alternatives are. And then you do need to engage citizens. So it becomes more debate about, well, what do we want to prioritise? And where do we want to put it? So I think that's a really important point to come across. But I think the other point I comment was made about, are we looking at the right variables? Which is related to that point, but also I think it is a question. There are lots of data which are being collected. They aren't the ones which are being foregrounded. Those decisions about what gets into the standard Eurostat data sets, what gets used in the distribution of funds, those to some extent are shaped by historical approaches to policy and what mattered at certain times and the operation of a welfare state, aren't they? And I wonder, have we kept up with what really matters now and where the trends are and what the possibilities are with new data? Are we stuck in kind of previous bureaucratic ways of working, which is shaping those? And I suppose from that, how do we look ahead to know what's going to happen? We're raising questions about responding to the climate crisis, thinking of wider issues. Are we actually looking at the right variables and what will matter in terms of inequalities and well-being in 10 years' time, 20 years' time? And where perhaps should we be looking for that data if we need to respond to that situation?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Can I? Yes, I think just for my side sort of conclusion. I mean, I really appreciate what you say. I fully agree. I'm not certain that we can be innovative constantly and then we can reinvent everything all the time. But I have the feeling that living in times of like sort of a permanent crisis, after two decades or more of withdrawal of states, then it's the time for states to be back. And it's also time to consider that back again in the way we approach this question of spatial justice, territorial inequalities, etc. When I was mentioning these invisible flows of money, I mean, if you let aside maybe Bulgaria and Ireland, and I'm talking about a couple of persons, but for every single EU member state, it's more than 30% of the GDP, which is spent, and it's redistributed every year. And this is totally invisible there. And how do you go? How do we do with that? What do we do? Because now we see with the after the COVID, the whatever it cost, and then also now the war, etc., that there is more and more need for public investments. This will be growing also at the EU level, and this is not captured right.
No.